Consulting, and today we're with Kevin Harvatine from Penn State University and with Jonas de Souza from Perdue Ag, and we've been having a conversation on the different types of fats, how to use them.
So the one thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is we're standing here in July, and there's a bit of a tradition going to summer diets to increase fat concentration. And traditionally the thinking is that fat's energy without being fermentable, so that decreases some of that heat load on the cow. Would you want to comment on those recommendations?
Yeah, well, I see a lot of places people would say we have like a summer fat and a summer strategy and a winter strategy, right, for fats. I think, as Kevin mentioned, we usually think bringing fat, we're bringing calories. My position is we have to think two ways when we do that. So how that fat or fatty acid that I'm choosing will affect feed intake, because if I'm adding a fat and I'm losing intake, that energy advantage that you think you're having, you're probably not having. And the second is really how that fat is digested, because that energy value that fatty acid will bring will also depend on that. So I do think, I do like the concept of feeding diets with a little bit more fat, especially during the summer. Been doing some work in trying to think about what we can do in terms of fatty acid profile, but my point is we just have to be careful in terms of not overfeeding fat or not overfeeding some specific fatty acids and not having a negative effect of doing that. So.
Yeah, and I just add to it, I really wish we had better data, research data on this. Just heat stress is a difficult thing to do, especially in nutrition experiments, because we can't get enough cows in heat chambers to do those in the perfect controlled way, right? Yeah. But it's certainly, I think, a long tradition on using some extra fat during the summer. Just a couple things that I would put caution there is that I think if your diet's working and you have things dialed in, maybe I'd be a little bit conservative to make big swaps in what I'm doing, but it's something to keep in mind. The other thing that I think is interesting, and maybe you thought about this, is that some of the heat stress work with Lance Bumgard shows that cows actually prefer to use glucose rather than fatty acids as a metabolite. So I think it's a little bit interesting to think about that we do have less heat of fermentation, but we still need some glucose and some other nutrients. Yeah, any comment there?
I really like Baumgart's research on that line, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And I agree when people try to make big swings on the diet, especially the carbohydrate fat ratio in the summer. I'm not a big fan of that. I think we still have to consider that cow going through that stressful period, you probably challenge a little bit more her immune system as well. We know immune system usually would prefer to use glucose as a source of energy than actually using fat. So that's why I agree with Kevin in terms of avoiding some of these big swings on my diet's change. So.
Yeah, I also want to point out that remember, you should be expecting a different fat concentration and a different milk yield in the summer than other times of the year. So there's a seasonal pattern there. It's a little bit different across the country, but just because you have lower milk, you should be about 0.2 units on average lower in July than you are in January. And I think sometimes we're chasing, trying to fix a problem that's actually not a problem. It's the biology.
A natural variation. And the same, I point out for some people that right now that is, I think a lot of people look into some classes of milk fatty acid, the de novo mix it, and shooting for a perfect value. And I would say, I don't think there's a perfect value there, but just consider that is natural variation just by changing, season patterns. And you have to be careful when you want to chase like a specific value. So be aware of that as well.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. Kevin, thank you for coming. Jonas, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I'm Glenn Flickinger, 21st Century Consulting, and that's our opinion.